Hello guys, welcome to Study IQ. In this session, we are going to talk about a new module that is investment models. And when we talk about the investment models, okay, let me write the heading. So investment models, right? And the most important one that we are going to discuss here is the public-private partnership, PPP. So if you look into this, what is PPP? It's actually a joint venture between the government or a statutory body and private. Okay, so if you want a formal definition, you can just write one line over there. It refers to a contract or joint venture. So it's a contract or a joint venture between the government or a statutory body and private sector. So it's between government or a statutory body and a private sector entity. Regarding what? It should be a construction of a new project. That means it may be a greenfield project. That means a new project or maintenance of something which is already existing, right? And there are different forms and different types are there. We will be talking about all these different levels of private participation. Okay, so between government and private sector entity for the construction or maintenance of an infrastructure asset. So it should be a greenfield project, or it can be a brownfield project. It can be a new project. It can be an old project. It can be the maintenance, etc. So we will see the different levels of private participation. So what you can do is you can give a heading that is levels of private participation. So that's what I'm going to discuss now. Guys, so the next topic is, actually, I'm not talking about the objectives and impediments and all in this session. We will be talking about that later. So what is more important is this one, levels of private participation. Levels of private participation. Like you can see, there are different types of PPP. Within that, the private participation will be very low to private participation can be very high. Like we can see that from low to very high it will move, and it can be in between. You might have heard something like engineering, procurement, and construction. So we will be discussing all these terms as well. You might have heard about LD, OD. You might have heard about BOLT or simply BLT or BTL, right? And I don't want you to be confused with each of these terms. Or you might have heard about affirmage, right? And then BOT, right? So you will be coming across a lot of things. So BOT and then BOOT, right? This is another version of BOT. And then you might have heard this BOOST, boost. So like there are different terms, then simply BOO and then hybrid annuity model, etc. So what I'm looking to do in this session is I'm going to discuss about these various levels of private participation. And when we talk about various levels of private participation, within that itself, all these different terms will be covered actually. So if I'll just give you a glimpse of what we're going to do. So what are the different levels? If you see, first one, it may be just a supply of something, supply of raw material, supply of input, something like that, or supply, or it could be some service contract, right? Now, when I talk about service contract, means like annual maintenance, etc. Or it may be some kind of outsourcing, right? Some food, beverages, etc. Supply of coffee, tea, some food, like that. Okay, so it could be raw material, it could be service like annual maintenance, or it could be some outsourcing, like the private sector will provide food, beverages, etc. Like that. Now, second, now here you can see the private participation is actually very, very low. In fact, we won't consider in India this as a public-private partnership. It is technically not considered as private-public partnership. What we are discussing various levels of private participation. So I'll discuss with you all the different levels of private participation, around 6-7 levels I'll discuss, out of which 5 belongs to, or in India, we consider 5 as PPP. Guys, this is a very important topic for mains. There's a very important topic for your essay to understand this. Public-private partnership, they used to ask essay repeatedly. You should be knowing it very clearly, because this is something related to economy, something related to infrastructure. Very, very important. You have to give that much importance, and you need to understand this. And it is very difficult for you to go read a textbook and understand these things. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do here. And next, if you see, it could be management. So that is Here, it will be considered as public-private partnership, management, or like operation contract. So here you can see private participation is actually getting more. So I'm going like this, low to high, right? You can see that. So here it is getting higher. Public participation level is slightly higher. Third one, if you see, I'll be explaining this. Turnkey is a name, or design build contracts. I'm just writing the name, design build contracts. So it's like EPC only. You will design, you will build, and you will give it to government. So like you will be giving it to government, a ready-made project. You will be designing, public, private sectors designing, will be building and giving it to government. And what are the different stage? What are the conditions? We'll be talking about that. So here I'm not talking about exactly public-private partnership as such. I'm discussing various levels of private participation. Let's understand in that way. Then we come to different aspects. The fourth one is leasing. And within leasing also, there are different types of leasing. I'll be talking about that. This is very important. Leasing is very important. Fifth one, concession. Concessions or BOT. I'll talk about this, all this. Then sixth one is partial disinvestment. Partial disinvestment. So you know what is the next one? It will be full disinvestment. So partial disinvestment or divestiture or joint venture. So that means partial disinvestment means what? Some of the shares of government have been sold to private. So some will be with the government. So it's actually now joint venture between private and the government, right? So it's it could be also called as joint venture or divestiture. Okay. Now the seventh one, it's a full disinvestment. Full disinvestment. What is that called? You are selling your entire share. Government entire share is sold to private. That is privatization. Okay. What is the opposite? Nationalization. Government purchasing the entire shares. Like what has happened with the bank nationalization, private banks, the shares of the banks has been purchased by the government. So it lead to expenditure from government side. What kind of expenditure? Capital expenditure, because you are getting some assets by spending something. Since it is spending, it is outgoing. It is an expenditure, but you're making asset. So something have to do with asset and liability. So it is capital. So that's a capital expenditure. Now here, when it comes to disinvestment, you are getting money. That means incoming. That is receipt. It's a receipt. It's a capital receipt because you are losing your asset. So here, when I talk about disinvestment, it is capital receipt. When I talk about nationalization, it is capital expenditure. Okay, so here I'm talking about capital receipt. It could be full. That means complete privatization. It could be partial. That's what I mean by divestiture or joint venture. Okay, guys, we'll be talking about this. So privatization. Out of this, we won't consider this is not considered as PPP. This is not considered as PPP. So what are PPP in India? Generally, we consider this 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what we actually consider as PPP. Now, guys, I hope this part is very clear. I'll be explaining each of this. Why I have told like this is because this can be asked as prelims question, which among the following. So you should be very clearly knowing that. Very, very clear it should be. Okay. So now let's start with one by one. The first one will be talking about supply or service contracts, right? Or outsourcing. I don't think that I need to explain that much. Supply means private sector here will provide raw materials or the inputs. That's what you mean by supply means. So their role is to supply. The government has to construct some infrastructure or anything. Government don't have that thing, means government will buy it from the private. Can we consider that as a public-private partnership? No, right? Like you are constructing your house. You don't have the raw materials. You will have to buy from someone else. So will you consider this as a partnership between you and the other person? No, right? You paid, they are giving it. Simple. That is what all about supply. This is not public-private partnership, right? Then the second one in that, what I've discussed is service contract. So you will be giving certain contract, right? Like you have done with your house and then some interior work need to be done. So you will give it as a contract. For that contract or some maintenance of the work, you might have constructed a swimming pool, big swimming pool. You cannot manage it. So you will you will go for a team who will be providing like monthly service or annual maintenance of that. So that is also not considered as a partnership. right? Same way you look from the perspective of government. Government also gives some such kind of contracts for annual maintenance of some infrastructure, right? So that is not considered as public-private partnership. Then the third one I'm talking about is outsourcing. Certain things will be outsourced, like there will be some infrastructure, hospital or some building is there, and the food, right? It will be provided by the private, right? Maybe when you talk about any government setup, right? Any government office or anything, food will be outsourced or the beverages will be outsourced. So these are not considered as public-private partnership. That's the first one. That's a very simple one. I don't think there is any explanation required for that. Even if it is required, I've done already. If you want, you can just write one line over there. Under this, government contracts on private entity to purchase inputs or service from it for a specified time period. After that, it's over. Okay. Now, the second one, that is what I've told you, management or operation contract. Management or operation contract. Now, guys, this is something which I consider as slightly important because here private participation is more, and we consider this as PPP. So this is actually PPP, right? Now, why? Now, here again, it could be either management or related to operation of the infrastructure. Now, there are two types here. It could be either with renovation. If it is with renovation, the private have to spend something. So they have to get that charges as well. If it is without renovation, private have nothing, just management only. So let me write it at without renovation, and it could be with renovation. So when it comes to without renovation, here there is no private investment. If you want, you can write that. With renovation, there is some private, government gave some asset. Now you need to renovate it. So before the management, so there is some investment which is required from private side. So obviously, how this private entity will recover that? It could be some user charges will be here, right? User charges, because private entity have to recover that investment which has been done. And it will be like for a medium term, maybe like 3 to 5 years. So that's what here you can, with renovation, it will be medium term. So this will be some short term, right? 1 to 3 years. So this is without renovation, private investment is not there. So private entity just manages it. Manages it means there may be some user charges, which is actually fixed, right? So manages the facility against a user charge. So there will be some fixed fee, right? So I hope this is very simple. So two types, without renovation, with renovation. Now, what is the third one? I've told you the third one, I'll explain later. That is turnkey or design build contract. Just write one line over there, then I'll explain that. Government enters into a contract with a private entity under which private entity has to establish a project against specified terms and payments. So here the entire project is actually established by the private entity and the key will be handed over to the government. Okay, so it is actually similar to EPC. What is EPC? Engineering, procurement and construction. Related to that also, you can just write one line over there. So when it comes to EPC, the raw materials will be provided by the government and then they will construct the project. So under EPC, private entity is responsible for engineering, design and construction of the facility, and the government provide inputs or raw material required for the project. So the government entity will design and construct. That's what it will indicate, right? Engineering, procurement and construction, or design build contract. So they will design, they will construct, and the inputs or the raw material will be given by the government. So that's about turnkey. Now, next one is leasing. Okay, so what I mean by leasing? Leasing of public assets. Okay, or lease, develop, operate, transfer. The other term, leasing of public asset, you can give the heading, or lease, develop, operate, transfer. LDOT. Lease, develop, operate, transfer. LDOT. Okay. So here, what is actually going to happen? The public assets are leased to the private sector entity, And upon that, government will collect certain charges. Like, what are the examples? Like, you will see when you go to the railway stations, you'll see some outlets over there. So it's actually a public asset which is given to some private person, private entity. So they will, maybe it may be a cafeteria, it may be some bookstall. You might have seen this, right? So for that, government will get some charges. Just write one line there if you want. Public asset is provided on rent to private entities. Okay. Second, in this, that is the first one. Second is, there are different categories in this leasing. First, you will provide the public asset on rent. Second is this BOLT or BLT. So what is it all about? Built on and then lease transfer. So built on for that period, after building, after you constructing for some period, on, and then lease and then transfer. Okay, just write one line. Private entity establish a project. That means they will build. That's what this built. And then transfers it to government on lease. Transfers to government on lease. And finally, transfers its ownership to government at the end of the term. Okay. So what they do, they build. That means they spend and they will build. So how to get it back? After the construction, they will give it to lease for government. So they will get the charge, right? And then finally, after the term, like they might have taken their investment and everything and some minor profit, then they will transfer the ownership to the government after the term. So that's what BOLT or BLT, built, lease, transfer. So they'll build and then they'll lease it and then they finally transfer the ownership to government. Just write one line if you want. The private entity establish a project, transfer it to government on lease, and finally transfer it to government the ownership at the end of the term. This gauge conversion, like narrow gauge to broad gauge, these conversions, right? They built it, then they lease it. The government is using it. Who's using the railway? Government is using it, right? And then finally ownership will be transferred after the fixed term. Perfect. So the third category of within that is actually this one, rent BOLT, that is BTL, built, transfer and lease. See guys, BLT, built, lease to government, then finally ownership will be transferred. Here, built, then transfer, then lease. Okay, so just write, private entity establish a project, transfer its ownership to government, and takes it back for lease for a specified period, right? So what is the difference between these two? First one, built, lease to government, government use it, get the charges, then transfer the ownership after the fixed term. BTL, build, transfer the ownership to government, then take it on lease and recover the cost. Simple, right? So I'm talking about different forms, the way you manage it. So leasing itself, there are different types. It could be rent, it could be BLT, it could be BTL. So have a very good knowledge about this. This is very important. Okay, so that is BTL. Okay, and it is similar to build, operate, transfer. Similar to build, operate, transfer. In build, operate, transfer is what? You build, you operate, you transfer. But here just that TL is reversed, right? Here you build, transfer, and then you take it lease and then you operate. Same only. Almost same. It is similar to BOT, right? It is almost similar to BOT. In BOT, you build and then operate and then transfer. Here you build, transfer, and then you take it back and you operate. Okay. And the fourth one in this category is actually affirmage. Affirmage. Just write one line there. It's a special type of leasing contract under which a private entity share a part of revenue with the government in lieu of fixed rent. So it's a special type of leasing contract under which private entity share part of revenue with the government in lieu of fixed rent. So there will be fixed rent and the part of the revenue is also shared with the government. So that's a special contract, affirmage. Now let's come back to the ones which we were discussing, the levels of private participation. We were in leasing. In leasing, I've discussed about 4 different types. Okay, now we will be going back to this concession or BOT. Just before I have mentioned about BOT, when I talked about BTL, build, transfer and lease. Same way, build, operate, transfer. Just write one line, guys, and then I'll explain. So concession, under concession or under this, private entity renovate or establish a brownfield project. That means already something which is existing, they will renovate that. Okay, so when I talk about brownfield, something which is existing. When I talk about greenfield, something new you're going to create. So the next one that I'm going to discuss will be what? Related to greenfield. So that's how you can connect it easily. So when I talk about concession, it is something which is already existing. Okay, under this, private entity renovate or establish a brownfield project, comma, operate it for a specified time, build, operate, and transfer. So under concession, it is a brownfield project. It's similarly like here, build means you renovate or establish something, operate it and transfer. So that's concession. That is brownfield, existing project. Okay. But when I talk about BOT, it is greenfield project. What is the difference between concession and BOT? Both are actually same in operational sense. Both are BOT only. But when I talk about BOT, build, that means you are building new. Concession, you are renovating something which is there. OT is same. If you want, you can make it as, for COT or something like that. But that's not correct way. Concession means it is similar to BOT, but you are not building new. In BOT, you are building new. That is greenfield project. But concession, it is brownfield project. You renovate a brownfield project, operate, transfer. BOT, you build, you construct a new project, greenfield project, operate, transfer. Okay. So BOT also you can write under this. It is also called design, build, finance, operate, transfer. It is also called as design, build, finance, operate, transfer. Guys, these are also something which you need to remember. Design, build, finance, operate, transfer. Now, if you can write these way in your mains, it is going to be really good and amazing. Same way, essay also. You can go back and check the previous essay paper. You used to get infrastructure related question. Very important. Whenever you talk about infrastructure, you cannot write an answer without mentioning PPP, public-private partnership. Okay. Whenever you talk about investment model, you cannot miss this. If you get a specific question on public-private partnership, like in 2012 essay was directly that. Okay, under this, private entity establish a greenfield project, operate it, and then transfer it to government. And then there are two different types of BOTs are there. Like first one, BOT toll. You guys know this. So this is user fee based BOT. Okay, user fee will be there. So you can write under this, project cost is recovered through user charges. So you build, operate, you collect the user charges, recover the cost, transfer it to government. So that is what BOT toll. That's the first category of BOT. Second category of BOT is something which is good BOT, annuity or annuity based BOT. You can write that. I'll just write BOT annuity. Next one you can write BOT annuity or annuity based BOT. So just write one line. Under this, user charges are not sufficient to recover the project cost. You keep on collecting the toll charges for how long, and still you will not be able to recover the cost. Some big projects. Okay, so what you will do is government compensate the private entity by making periodic payment through installment. So BOT annuity means government will also make payment in installment so that they will recover the cost. Once the cost is recovered, it will be transferred to government. At the same time, user charges will also be there. Okay. Now, so we have discussed about concession BOT. And then the third type in that is BOOT. I've mentioned about this. BOOT is build, own, operate, transfer. Build, own, operate, transfer, right? So here, the private entity established a project, operate it while retaining the ownership, and finally transfer it to government at the end of the term, like minor port concession in Gujarat, etc. Okay, so build, own, operate, transfer. So D, next is build, own, operate, share, transfer. Build, own, operate, share, transfer. I hope you can get these difference. That's the reason why I'm going in that order. First, I talked about BOT, build, own, operate, transfer. Then build, own, operate, transfer. Build, own, operate, share, transfer. Like that, you can remember easily. Just write private entity, establish a project. So establish a project, build it, operate. Okay, it for a specified term by keeping ownership, and then share part of revenue with the government here. And finally, transfer the project to government. Okay, so build, operate by keeping the ownership just like before, and then share the revenue with the government. And then finally, you will transfer it to government. And the last one, E, build, on, operate, BOO. So here, private entity will build, establish the project, operate it, and retaining its ownership. It is not transferred to government. So I hope it is clear the different levels, and that's it from my side. I hope you enjoy the session. See you guys. Thank you.